Hello and welcome to the Foundation Year Applicant Support webinar series. This is a podcast that's going to accompany the webinar programme, and it's an opportunity to hear from our Foundation Year students who've been through the process. If you want to get more information about how to apply step by step with lots of tips and advice, please do sign up for the application programme. That can be found on the Foundation Year website, which is at the foundationyear.cam.ac.uk. But at this time, I'd like to introduce our little crew that we have for this podcast. We'll start with Thea. Could you tell me who you are, where you study, what do you study, and what stage you're at?
Hello, I'm Thea. I'm at Murray Edwards College. I was on the foundation year last year, and I'm currently looking forward to starting the Classics Tripos this year.
Fantastic. And we have another student joining us today. Jaden, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Jaden. I did the foundation year 2 years ago, and I'm now in my second year of history at Fitzwilliam College.
Fantastic. And as we're recording this today, we're going to have a little peek behind the curtain, but it is the end of September as we're recording this first session, and we do have our new crop of foundation year students coming in, so it's their induction week. I just want to ask you both, do you remember anything about your induction week? How did it feel coming to Cambridge and realising you're actually here and ready to start studying at Cambridge?
I would say for me the induction week was a very fun time actually. I got to meet a very vast array of different people at the same time. My school wasn't that kind of diverse compared to the first year I was here at Cambridge, and the induction week was a little taste of that. I also got some academic support in the induction week. I was also very stressed about how to write an essay, how to manage my time and things of that nature, but in the induction week we had sessions on that, so that kind of calmed my nerves. Another good thing that the induction week did was it essentially gave me a base of friends that I could go into Freshers Week with. So I didn't have any anxiety about being alone because I knew loads of people from that week already. So I think the induction week did a lot of good things for me in first year.
That's amazing. How about you, Thea? How was your induction week experience? Do you remember any of it?
Yes, I think, I totally agree with what Jaden's saying. It's really nice to actually go into your first year at Cambridge, because being a foundation year student, it can all be a little bit as any student, but it can be a little bit overwhelming. So it's really nice to actually go into term with a community around you, which is definitely how I felt after the foundation week started. And I also felt like quite well prepared for what the foundation year would entail overall. So it was good preparation. I really enjoyed it, yeah.
That's amazing. Okay. And for those students who are currently doing their induction week, what's the one thing that you think they should be thinking about, remembering, one thing they should be doing, some bit of advice you would give those currently doing their induction week?
I think the induction week is a good tester for time management. I think you get a taste of what Cambridge is like through a trial supervision. So you can try and go into that with as much effort as possible so that when you actually get your first supervision, you're way ahead of all the other students. But I'd say the induction week is a time to meet new people. So if you can strike that balance in induction week where you're, trying to prepare for first week a little bit, but also trying to meet as many people as possible, when you actually get to Freshers Week, you'll have the best time of your life, basically.
That's amazing. How about you, Thea? Do you have any bits of advice or tips that you would give those currently doing the induction week?
My first tip is get enough sleep, because actually it's a really full-on week. It's amazing, but it's very sociable and it's very scheduled. There's so much going on that you don't want to miss. So you just kind of need to definitely be prepared. But part of that preparation is making sure you get enough sleep, which is something that I didn't necessarily do. So definitely recommend that.
I'm going to say, once you get to my age, getting enough sleep is always the battle. So I think that's great advice. A little bit of information about the application process. So this podcast is based around the application support webinars. And for the first one, we'll be talking about UCAS and personal statements. So when you're choosing University of Cambridge as your institution, you're going to do your UCAS application, and you should choose the course Foundation Year in Art, Humanities and Social Sciences, and you select an open choice for your college. You can select your preference at the later stage. So you both have your colleges. How did you choose your college, and what stage did you choose your college?
If you go on the internet, basically there are different websites where they list the pros and cons of each college. So basically what I did is I got a sheet of paper and I kind of went through every college and I ticked it if I liked it, or I crossed it if I didn't like it. So for example, for me, I really wanted a modern college, so that crossed all the traditional colleges off. I really liked to cook, so the kitchen facilities were really important for me. So my college is the only college with an oven in first and second year, I think. So that's the reason why I ended up arriving at mine. I also like to go to the gym, so some colleges don't have a gym, some do. Mine happens to have one as well. So I think if you can go on the internet, you can just search college pros and cons, and then essentially you just go through the list and then try and find the college that suits you, essentially.
Okay. And are you a good cook then if you have your own kitchen?
I try my best.
What's the best meal you make?
I make every meal as best as possible.
That's a good answer. I like that. But I think that's a very bit of advice. It's like picking the college based on your list of things that you're looking for, because it's the place you're going to be living. And you made this selection during the next stage after the UCAS and personal statements and the FY SAC?
Yeah,
which we will be touching on in our next podcast. So do sign up so you get all the podcasts. Theo, how about you? How did you make your choice about your college?
I actually did an open application, so I kind of took the opposite approach. I wasn't too sure at all about which college to apply for. I could not choose, and so I decided, for my own peace of mind, to just do an open application, which meant that actually later on, when I got accepted, I was fished out of the pool by my college, Murray Edwards, and so that actually meant that when I got my offer, I was very excited, but I hadn't actually heard that much about my college, so it was a little bit scary, because I was like, oh my goodness, what even is this college? But the more research I did about it, and when I went to visit Cambridge and everything like that, I just became so excited. And now, having been at my college for a year, I absolutely love it. So I think what you can get from that is, whilst it's good to be prepared, if you really can't make a decision, you don't have to. And there's a lot of like college loyalty, I think. So wherever you end up being, you will love it. So yeah.
And it's almost as if I planned it, but I didn't. But it's great to know we have two people, one who's made a choice and was meticulous and looked through, and another person who maybe wasn't 100% sure, didn't really have a strong preference. But the one thing that comes from it is you both love your colleges now, and you're both very comfortable and happy where you are. So I think that's a great bit of advice. So when it comes to the UCAS process and the personal statement, the first thing is you need to find out about the foundation year and decide that it's for you. So how did you both find out about the foundation year?
Honestly, I just had a look at Google. I'd got my A-level results and I was on a gap year and I was working full time, but I knew that I wanted to go to university. So I just started searching up foundation years, and all of the other foundation year programs that I looked at, or foundation programs that I looked at, didn't really click with me because I wanted to do something that was quite varied. So when I came across the Cambridge foundation year and had a look at the wide kind of range and subject variety that was available, I clicked with it, and I felt very strongly that was something that I wanted to do and explore different areas and different subjects and things like that. So yeah, I just Googled it really, and clicked with it and haven't looked back. So yeah.
Okay. And how about you, Jaden? How did you find out about the foundation year?
So essentially what happened was I was filling out my UCAS application and I had 4 universities down and I was looking for a 5th one and I couldn't decide which one was going to be the 5th one. And then my mum told me, by the way, Cambridge have a foundation year and I think you'd be eligible. Then I was like, I'm not really interested in that, I'm okay. Then she said, you have to look because otherwise, like, I'm not going to be happy. So then I had a look. Then I was like, I'm quite an indecisive person when it comes to subject. Like, I like a lot of different subjects. So I was like, okay, well, I'm not really sure that the course I've picked for the other 4 is like my favorite course in the world. So I think it might be useful to do a course where I can try different things for 1 year and then decide. So then I was like, okay, let me go with the foundation year for my 5th option.
That's amazing. And when you were making your applications, did you have any support from your schools or any guidance from any counsellors or any advisors, anything like that?
Personally, no, because I did it when I did my UCAS application when I was already on my gap year. So I had my previous UCAS application, but I basically rewrote all of it, my personal statement and everything. So I got my reference from my school and everything like that, but the actual process of it was quite self-started, I would say.
Okay, and how about you, Jaden?
I'd say the same. I also applied on a gap year, so I was basically by myself. But I'd say the overall foundation year team, and you as well, were very helpful in making a very easy process. I didn't feel like I was disadvantaged compared to people that were still in school. So yeah.
I'm going to say, I think you flatter me too much there, but I would like to ask, and I take a risk in asking this question, did you both take part in the Applicant Support Programme in the webinar series?
Yeah.
You both did. Fantastic. I was hoping the answer would be yes, because otherwise it doesn't look good for the podcast. But how useful or how valuable did you find that series? Did it help going step by step through the process?
Yeah, definitely. I remember like where I sat when I was watching the webinars, and especially because the foundation year was unlike what I was applying to with the 4 other subjects. Also, Cambridge was not something that my school really catered to. Mm-hmm. So it's not like I was surrounded by people in the year above that regularly applied to Cambridge. So I had no idea what the process was. And so the webinars, I remember every single time I watched the webinar, I was like, yeah, I feel like I have a better grasp on what I have to do now.
That's fantastic. And how about yourself, Thea? Do you have a similar...
Yeah, absolutely. I think the webinars are so incredibly helpful because they're very detailed, and equally, I feel that, I mean, I say this as someone who has now taken part in the webinars, but that's not why I say it. I think having students on the webinars as well to answer questions and support is so invaluable, because it feels a bit, I don't know about you, Jaden, but for me, it felt quite distant when I was looking at the webinars, because I'd only just started the application process when the webinars were coming out, and I felt like, who actually does this really? I was like, I'll never be able to do this. So actually seeing that there were students who were on the foundation year and having such a good time of it as well, and being able to answer all of my questions was a really valuable resource. And then when I got in, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be like one of the people on the webinar. So cool.
So when you were making your personal statement, you're starting to think about your personal statement, thinking about writing it. The first question I have is, do you remember writing your personal statements?
Yeah.
You do? How about you, Thea?
Yeah.
Okay. How was that process? How did you begin writing the personal statement? What sort of things were you thinking about?
So I did a lot of... I didn't start from scratch, I think it's important to say. I did adapt my previous personal statement because it felt like a lot of the material was already quite relevant. For people who are watching this who are in school, you'll have a lot of support anyway on how to write a personal statement, so use that. But I think the most important piece of advice that I received and that I would give as well is to make sure that you're being specific and not kind of shoehorning information in, because I think it's really easy to think about every single thing that you've ever achieved academically and otherwise and try and fit it in. And some of it's going to be relevant, but some of it isn't really going to further your application and is just going to take up space. So you need to be specific and also kind of quite controlled in the evidence that you do use and what you do mention is what I would say.
Okay. How about you, Jaden? Do you have any... Well, one, do you remember your personal statement? Yes. And also, do you remember the process of writing it? How did you approach that?
Yeah, I remember writing my personal statement. I struggled with it quite a lot because, like you just said, there's so many things that you want to put into it. But I think I agree with everything you said. You can't be putting everything into it. It has to be in a very concise, controlled manner. And I think the most important thing to be able to pick what has to go into it is that you have to be kind of passionate about what you're writing. Because I think that the interviewers and people who read your personal statement will be able to tell whether you actually care about what you wrote or not. And if it doesn't appear like you care and you've just, you've kind of went on the Google and picked the hardest thing and said that you read it, this is not going to further your application, I don't think. So I think it's really important to be judicious in what you pick. And there has to be something that you actually really care about. And it's funny because when you start only looking at things you really care about, the focus of your personal statement becomes quite easy. So for me, I remember I wrote mine about Brexit because I remember I used to go to school and me and one teacher would argue about Brexit every single day. And it was like, and then I'd go home and then I'd research things and then go back to school and then argue with my teacher again. So if you read my personal statement, it was clear that this is a person that really cares about politics and Brexit. So I think that's my biggest advice is pick something that you actually like and that you've spent your own time kind of without any influence from your teachers or your parents that you've just, out of pure interest, have just explored.
Absolutely, especially because the foundation year doesn't expect you to write your statement catered to the foundation year because you're applying to lots of other specific university subjects. So I think, like you said, the most important thing is that you are passionate about what you are writing about, and that comes through.
I think that's a great bit of advice. I think showing the passion, showing the genuine interest, that always communicates very easily through a personal statement, and actually having genuine passion and interest in a subject area usually helps with that. So what personal qualities, skills and experiences did you include or try to communicate through the personal statement? Was there anything in particular around the subject area? So you mentioned about your interest in Brexit and things like that. Is there anything similar that you put in yours, Thea?
My personal statement, mine was quite classics oriented, and I think I specifically focused on women in classics, and kind of feminist perspective, and I took it from that kind of angle. So I think when you're writing, it's actually quite important to have an angle and have an opinion on what you're writing about. Like we said earlier, it's really easy to list things, but actually, if you have a perspective to come from, you're kind of naturally pinpointing your areas of interest and making your statement flow a lot more, and just overall be more interesting to write, but I would say also to read as well. So yeah, just have a perspective to write from. It's my main.
Okay, fantastic. So we've talked about things you might include, things that we think they should be thinking about. What are the things that these applicants shouldn't be doing? What's something they should avoid doing with their personal statement that you think is going to make the personal statement worse or ring hollow?
I think what Thea just said was really important, actually. Like, you have to offer some kind of perspective because without a perspective, it's just not interesting to read. That means that I can basically, if you just list me like regurgitated points, I can basically get your personal statement from the internet by just searching. So it has to be something that comes from you. That's number one. Number two, I think in terms of things you have to not do, don't just put books in there because you want to like show that you've read books if you haven't read them. Because again, you won't be passionate about it. They'll be able to tell that you've just kind of shoehorned it in there, and then like it doesn't really add anything. It detracts away from your application actually. And another thing that I would say that you shouldn't do is kind of just try and list things that you're interested in. I think the perspective thing that you just said was really good in that I think it has to come together in a cohesive piece. It can't just be I'm interested in this and I'm interested in that and I'm interested in that. There has to be some reason why you're interested in it and why all of that ties together to show your interest in wanting to study the foundation year as well too.
Yeah, and I think just to reiterate, do not include books that you have not read because it is really obvious that you haven't read them, especially if your personal statement gets mentioned at interview. This was something that happened to me during one of my interviews, not the having not read a book thing, but actually having my personal statement referenced and actually one of my points that I'd made challenged. And I think it was one of those moments where I was like, oh my goodness, this is a bit scary, but actually being able to argue my point was really fun and really interesting. But if you haven't read a book and you're asked to talk about it, it will be obvious because you won't be able to back yourself, essentially, I would say. So yeah, just don't do that. And equally, I would say don't overcomplicate. I think everyone wants to have the big idea and kind of a new perspective on things. That's not necessarily what's important. It's just having your own perspective. Yeah, I know we're talking about perspective a lot, but it really is that important. So.
And I just want to add something as well. I think you should focus more on clarity than kind of trying to have the most complicated, complex
Yeah.
sentences in the world. When you actually get to university, you'll find out that people care more about clarity and ease of reading than like the most convoluted sentence that you can think of. And also, just like Thea, I actually got asked about just, I think, 5 words in my personal statement, and we spoke about it for about 20 minutes. And if I did not know a good deal about those 5 words, I would not be sitting here right now. So yeah, it's really important to actually know every single part of what you're writing about.
Okay. And you both mentioned about some reading and some books that you had looked at. Where did you find did you find like a list of supercurriculars? Was it stuff that just interested you? How did you choose what to read?
For me, I already did classical civilizations at A level. So I had I'd read some classical books based on that, but actually my area of interest, kind of female perspective in classics, wasn't, and that's what I wrote about in my statement, was something that wasn't really talked about on the course. And I essentially went out and found books from female classicists have written, and read those books and then referenced those. Equally looked at feminist perspective in Greek theatre plays, I think it was. So I think for me, it was expanding on subject material that I already had some basis in. It wasn't going out and finding something completely new. It was just, it's like Brexit, finding something that you're interested in and actually expanding on that outside of the classroom is what kind of sets you apart, because some people won't do that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was the exact same. I think the Brexit thing was from, essentially, I did A-level biology. So I think from then, because I was arguing with my biology teacher, I started reading a biology book about Brexit. And so naturally I could use that in my personal statement. But I didn't just talk about that book. I talked about a different book as well. Because what I wanted to show is that the reason why I wanted to study a broad degree eventually, like politics and international relations, which was what I initially applied for at the other universities, is that there was some politics books that my understanding could be aided by in trying to find out more about biology. So I read about a different book called The Colour of Law, which is about like redlining. But those two things have nothing to do with each other. And the way I found the other book was just through watching YouTube, and I saw someone mention it, and I was like, that's kind of interesting. So then I started to read it. And when I started to read it, I was like, wow, I'm really interested in this. I should read what other people have to say about the book. And then I was like, okay, I understand the book a lot more now. I can mention it in my personal statement. So you can find a book, and it doesn't just have to be a book. I also watched a lecture series on YouTube about justice, and I was going to include that for a little bit. It could be absolutely anything. It could be a podcast. It can be a TV episode. It can be literally anything.
That's really good. And I think it's great sort of listing off like YouTube and podcasts, because me personally, I love having something on that I can listen to, or something I can watch in the background whilst I'm doing other things, especially if it's something I'm interested in. So, Thea, did you have a podcast or any YouTube or history channel or anything like that too?
I did mention a podcast in my personal statement, and it was because during lockdown, I left school early after doing GCSEs, and for a few weeks you're kind of like woo woo summer holidays, like, but then actually you can't leave the house, which was my COVID experience. So I started to get quite heavily into kind of classic-y podcasts, and the one that resonated with me the most was Natalie Hines' podcast about ancient women. So I really enjoyed that, and I mentioned it in my personal statement because I think for me that was the kind of jumping off point from where I did all my extra research. So she would kind of mention ancient kind of historical figures of women, mythological or real, and then I would go and kind of find extra resources because I was just so interested in learning about them. And I think there were other things that I looked at as well, but I think it's quite important to have a wealth of kind of resources to pick from. So, the more that you've read, the more that you've listened to, the more that you've watched, the more that you have access to talk about in your personal statement, and the more kind of streamlined it can be, I would say. So yeah, just having a lot of kind of resources to choose from can be quite nice, and it makes it a lot easier as well, I would say.
So did either of you start watching, listening, reading something that you thought would be really valuable for your application for your personal statement, and about 10 minutes in you realised, I am not interested in this? What did you do if you did have that experience? Would you force yourself to keep reading, to keep watching? What would you do?
I would say it happened many times. The lecture series I just mentioned, I did not finish that series. I just didn't find it interesting. What I'd say is, like, because it's stuff that you should find interesting, there is no obligation to do anything. So if you don't find it interesting, you don't have to like carry on and force yourself to do it because you think it's really nice to put in your personal statement. It should really just be things that you're interested in. And this is, as she just said, like, basically, it should be, the process should be quite easy because it should be things that you're already naturally interested in. So getting a wealth of things that you're interested in, like books or podcasts, it should be stuff that when you see, you'd be inclined to kind of consume anyway, rather than just consuming them just for the purpose of your personal statement. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I've actually done a few personal statements because I initially applied for modern languages instead. So I'll speak to that personal statement now, kind of the initial personal statement that I made, and I read, I can't remember which book it was, but I read a Dostoevsky book. You see from the reactions there, it's quite intense Russian literature, and I enjoyed parts of it, but it felt quite forced at points, and I think I came away from reading the book. I did get through it. It took me ages, and it wasn't particularly enjoyable. So I didn't actually get as much out of it as I wish I had. So I would say, I could completely agree with Jaden, but also if you are, if you force yourself to read something, you're not necessarily going to get that much out of it. It's more important that you find something that aligns with your interests. So yeah, you don't have to read Dostoevsky or whatever else to just put it in your personal statement, because your passion for a certain thing is what comes through in the end.
That's great. So we've touched on a lot of stuff around the UCAS application and personal statements. If you want more information and more granular information, you can find information on the website, along with the webinar series where we're going into more detail, and we'll actually have members from our academic team taking part as well. But a little bit of information: your personal statement, your UCAS application, the deadline for this will be on the 29th at 6 p.m. for the 2025 intake. But as we're just coming toward the end of our time on this, our first podcast, what I'd like to ask is, what is your best piece of advice you would give students? They're currently sat in a position, maybe they're watching this podcast or listening to this podcast, maybe they've just signed up for the Applicant Support webinar. What's your bit of advice you'd give them in the position they're currently in?
I think my best piece of advice would be believe that you're good enough and believe that you can do it, because I certainly struggled with imposter syndrome all the way through to the induction week, and I felt like, there must be some kind of mistake that they've let me on. It's not the case at all. There's a reason why you were chosen to take part in the foundation year. That might be a bit early to say, really, but just believe that you can do it, because you certainly can, and just let what you're interested in shine through. So yeah.
I can only second that, basically. At every stage at Cambridge so far, I felt like there's going to be a day where I'm basically exposed. I'm a scam artist. But basically, I would agree fully. I would say you should back yourself. You should believe in yourself. You deserve to be here. You deserve to apply. You deserve to go through interview if you make it to that stage. And I would say if you just believe in yourself, what you deserve will happen. And so you shouldn't let negative self-belief hold you back. I think there's loads of people who'll be watching this with a lot of talent, and you shouldn't let imposter syndrome or feeling like you're not good enough hold you back from that. You definitely are.
Yeah, absolutely. You're never going to know whether you can get in until you actually apply and try it. And as evidenced by us here today, you can do it. So, yeah.
Fantastic. I love that. It's a very positive note to end on, I think. So if you are interested in taking part in any other foundation year events, including the Applicant Support Programme, the series of webinars, you can sign up at the foundation year website. So if you go to the foundationyear.cam.ac.uk/events, and you can find the event listing there. Or if you check the description or on the screen, there will be a way to sign up for the webinar series there. But I'd just like to say thank you to both Theo and Jaden for joining me for this first podcast. And hopefully we'll see you on our second one. Have a wonderful day.